Good morning, guys. This is going to be a quick walk through the projection machine. Here's the URL. I'll email it to you as well. Just a reminder that this is a private tool for the RotoViz writing team. Okay, up here at the top in the team selector, this is where we're going to choose which team to project. We've got some tabs below that. Team level assumptions, QB, wide receiver, tight end, running back, and fantasy scoring settings. These are the default settings. I think it's best if we all leave those the same so our projections are apples to apples. Before we dive into that, I want to scroll down and look at some of the other tabs. Right down here in the middle are a few more tabs. The first tab is projections, and when you're ready to submit, this is where you will do it. Now preferably you don't hit submit until you're all ready, but if you hit it too early, you can redo that team and submit again, and your second entry will overwrite your first. Down beneath that is where we see the projections for this team. Now I haven't tweaked anything yet, but this is just based on league averages what is in here. There are a few things you can do when you're doing projections. So for Atlanta, pretty much a slam dunk, Matt Ryan is going to be the quarterback. If a team has more than one quarterback that could be in consideration, you'll be able to switch that there. Same thing in the wide receiver area. This is the default for wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. But if for some reason you thought, Devin Hester would beat out Justin Hardy for the wide receiver role, you could add him and take out Hardy. Same idea with tight end and running back. So as a default, Tevin Coleman is the RB1, then Freeman, but you can change the order of those by removing them. Composite projections. I try to not look at this too much until I'm done with the team because I don't want to get prejudiced by what other people have done. But there are two tabs here. The first is averages, all the players that have been projected. You can also look for a specific person's projections. So if you wanted to look at mine, you could put my name in there. Or if you wanted to look at a specific team, and so on, or you could look by a position to get rankings or projections just for a position. The second tab here actually is kind of important to look at, and I encourage you to do that. So this shows all the rankers or projectors and the total number of times a team has been projected. So if we sort by that column, you can see a bunch of teams have only been projected 3 times, and then a handful of teams have been projected 6 or more. We want to try to keep things balanced a little bit, so if you're starting, you could maybe start with some of the lower number of projection teams. The Data Explorer tab is super useful, and this is really where you're going to build your projections. The first thing you can do is you can select a team season to serve as your baseline for data. In the case of Atlanta, they have a new offensive coordinator, Kyle Shanahan. I just looked up his coaching history real quickly. These are all the places he's been an offensive coordinator, and so I used those as a baseline for my current projections. I didn't use all of them. I didn't use Cleveland because I didn't think that was a very similar team. The receiving core is very different and so on. And I didn't use Washington either because I think RG3 and the stuff that happened there was kind of different. I did pull in a couple of Houston Texans seasons. I thought Shaw was kind of like Ryan a little bit. They had a dominant number 1 receiver like Atlanta does. I used 3 seasons to form my baseline data. I just used Atlanta from last year and then 2 Houston seasons to kind of balance it out. If you're doing the Jets, you could maybe pull in some of the Buffalo seasons where Chan Gailey was the offensive coordinator and so on. And when you add or remove things, it's going to change the default data down here. So if we take out Houston, it's going to change some of the numbers a little bit. What we're going to do is a lot of back and forth between the offensive history and the player comps underneath the Data Explorer. So let's take a look at how we would do this. This is just kind of a how-to example, not necessarily a real projection. First, we need to set some team level assumptions. And the first is point margin. That's on average, what's the score differential for this team on any given play. So we can find that in the Data Explorer. The score is projected to be negative 0.68 for Atlanta on any given play. So we'll put that in here. What is the pass tendency? Based on the team's seasons that I put in here, the pass tendency is 0.028. And the pace tendency, how many plays a game does the team tend to run? The net pace, based on my assumptions here, is 0.344. Now you may notice when I put those numbers in that the lines in the graphs here change. So let's talk about the graphs. The gray bars represent the actual team history in any given year. So in 2014, this was Atlanta's actual point margin per play. It was negative 2 point something. Then you have three little colored bars in here. Green is league average, and then this would be the 75th percentile and the 25th percentile for the two red lines. So when you're making a projection, if you have somebody way above that or way below that, realize that you're in extreme territory. And then the dotted line is what I've actually set it to. So Atlanta looks to be a little bit better than league average in that area. They're going to be 75th percentile basically in pass ratio, and plays per game just a smidgen above average. All right, let's move on to the QB level. Again, these are just default settings that happen to be in here, so I need to change all those. I can get some idea of sack rate from here. So based on these 3 seasons, this was the quarterback sack rate. I could also use, in conjunction with that, the NFL Career Graphs app. So let's put in Matt Ryan. So here's at a glance for Ryan's career. And if we look at Atlanta last year, we can see he was right there. So I'm going to set the sack rate to 5%. Quarterback rush percentage, I'm guessing it's pretty low for Matt Ryan, and it does look like that. He's below the 25th percentile the last 2 years. If we look at the rushers data on based on my baseline assumptions, let's see the QB1 gets about 8.5%. So that seems like a good number. Interception rate, here was Ryan's actual interception rate last year. Based on the offensive history is about 3%. So we'll just leave that right where it is. I'm not going to go through every single position, but let's dive into wide receiver. And wide receiver, you can do settings for wide receiver 1, 2, and 3, and 4. For tight end, you can do 2. For running backs, you can do 3. So let's take a quick look at wide receiver. This is going to be Julio. You can see what Julio himself did with these gray bars. We can use our Data Explorer, which uses these baselines to come up with these numbers. So in these offenses, wide receiver 1 gets a 29% market share. I did show you how to kind of cross-check or research things in the NFL Career Graphs app. You can do a version of that here in the projection machine as well on this Player Comps tab. Here are his comps for this upcoming season. Market share 26.8%. So the last 2 years, Julio has been over 28% market share. His comps have been about 27%. The offensive history based on these inputs has been about 29%. So I think all signals point towards Julio having a very large market share this year. Let's go with 29%. Then I can adjust his catch rate, his yards per target, touchdown rate, and rushing percentage based on the same methodology. I can look at the historical data based on the offenses I chose. I can look at comparables for him, or I can look at his own actual history using the Career Graphs app. And then I'm going to do the same for Roddy and for either Devin Hester or Justin Hardy. Then I'll go on to tight end, and then I'll go on to running back, where it gets kind of fun. You can project the breakdown, the workload split between Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman. Now, based on the inputs you put in, based on all the changes you make to all these inputs, the projection machine is going to tweak your actual projections. So at the moment, I haven't finished, but I have a 60% pass ratio for the Falcons. Here's where Ryan is. Here's where Julio is. Now, these aren't complete projections, of course, but you get the idea. Before I submit my projections, this is when I like to look over and see what other people have done, just to see if I'm really far off. Again, so to get here, composite projections, averages. This is what the collective wisdom of RotoViz writers has come up with so far. Collectively, we have Ryan at 294 fantasy points. My projection over here has him at 303. All right, but what I'm doing is kind of looking for a place where I might be really different than the team. The point is not that I want to be similar to the team, but if I'm really different, I should have a good rationale for why. So maybe I think a player is overrated or underrated. That's fine. Just, make sure you have a solid rationale for that in your mind. And that's good. We don't want to be following the herd. We want to be unique, but we do want to see where we differ from the herd and have a good reason for it. If you have questions or get stuck, you know where to find me on email or Twitter. And thanks in advance for spending the time on doing projections. I think it's a pretty powerful tool, and we get some great output from it. Thanks, guys.